Today's lecture is on older adulthood. This area, the study of this area is also called gerontology. If you decide to pursue like a certification or something in this area, from what I understand, it is due to the age of the population. It's constantly getting older. If you get a certificate in this, it is my understanding that you will pretty much never be out of work. Don't hold me to that, but that is something I've heard from many, many people. So this is obviously a hot area. This is showing the photo. If you're seeing the photo, the slide screen, you can see this person through various forms and ages of their life. I'm assuming this is the same lady. I'm thinking this is, like maybe 50s, 70s, and 90s. I'm not as far as looking at their clothing. I'm fairly certain one of my grandparents may have had that dress in the middle, though. But this is the progression of her from a younger, basically a very young adult, to maybe young middle age to an older adult. When we think about old age, a lot of different preconceptions tend to come to mind. So I invite you to look at this and to think about what common attitudes you might have about old age. And so I'll just read this out to you. What are some common attributes or preconceptions about old people? What are some characteristics by which we define someone as old? How does their behavior differ from that of children? And what is the worst age to be? I'll give you a second to pause. So, common attitudes about preconceptions that I frequently hear is that they're short, they're old, they might be slow. Those are just at least a few things. Maybe they're not as smart. And people usually have a fairly negative attitude about people that are going up there in years. Now, characteristics by which we define someone as old. Some people say, wrinkles, gray hair. I've been going gray since I was 14, which is when I really started working in theater. So I'd say my gray hair is all from the actors. So some of these things that people do say are characteristics of somebody who's old. Well, it might be possible that they have that appears in younger people as well. So be very mindful of how we are characterizing people one way or the other. As far as how their behavior differs from children, well, when you get old enough and if you deteriorate, it might be similar. So there are certainly other areas as well. And as far as what is the worst age to be, I'll give you a moment to think about that, because that actually leads into my joke of the day. So the worst age to be. 60 is the worst age to be, said the 60-year-old man. You always feel like you have to go to the toilet, and most of the time you stand there and nothing comes out. Ah, that's nothing, said the 70-year-old. When you're 70, you don't have a bowel movement anymore. You take laxatives, you eat bran, you sit on the toilet all day and nothing comes out. Actually, said the 80-year-old, 80 is the worst age of all. Do you have trouble going to the toilet too? Asked the 60-year-old man. No, I go every morning at 6. Go like a racehorse, no problem. So do you have a problem with your bowel movement? No, have one every morning at 6:30. Exasperated, the 60-year-old said, you go to the toilet every morning at 6 a.m. and again every morning at 6:30. So what's so bad about being 80? I don't wake up until 7. Anyway, I hope you all appreciated that silly joke. So my question for you guys is, how old can we get?
As medical technology advances, human longevity continues to increase. As a result, the average lifespan is increasing in most parts of the developed world, and the world's oldest people continue to set records. A Japanese woman recently broke her own record to become the world's oldest living woman. Her name is Kane Tanaka, and she recently turned 117 years old. The supercentenarian marked her occasion with friends and family at a nursing home in Fukuoka. Miss Tanaka, whose birthday was on the 2nd of January, took a bite of her big birthday cake and said with a smile, "Tasty, I want some more." Purple flower pins stood out from the right side of her short white hair as she made her way through the party in a wheelchair decorated with faux pink and white flowers, tinsel, and foil stars. She clapped her way into her big day and stopped to kiss the hands of well-wishers before singing a happy birthday song. Tanaka has dreamed of being the record holder for the world's oldest person since she turned 100, CBS News reported. The seventh of 8 children cried tears of joy when she was handed 2 plaques last year for being the world's oldest living person and the world's oldest living woman. Tanaka's honor is representative of Japan's cultural deference to its older populations, as well as a diet and healthcare system that allows its population to age well into the 80s and beyond. It also stands as a symbol of the low birth rate in the country, according to Reuters, potentially putting the country at risk of a labor shortage. During World War II, Tanaka worked in her family's store selling rice cakes and noodles. Her son Nobuo was captured by the Soviets, but was released in 1947. She continued to work in the store before retiring at the age of 63. In the 1970s, she visited the United States, where she has several nieces and nephews. At the age of 103, Tanaka was diagnosed with colon cancer, but survived a 5-hour-long surgery. When she was 107, her son wrote a book about her, which discusses her life and longevity. Tanaka currently resides in Fukuoka Prefecture and has lived in a nursing home since 2005. At the age of 117, she can get around with the help of a walker, play Othello, and do math problems and calligraphy. Her favorite foods include chocolate and pop beverages. She loves to write poetry, and she can still remember her trips to the United States. She attributes her longevity to her faith in God. She is the 4th Japanese person to hold the honor, the others being Nabe Tajima, Chio Miyako, and Masao Okawa. Many people are curious about Tanaka's diet and lifestyle, hoping to recreate her ability to live beyond a century. Food was a big part of her life, as her father ran a family business that made and sold sticky rice, udon noodles, and zensai, a traditional Japanese bean dessert. In 1937, while her husband was in the military, she became more involved in the business, Guinness reports, polishing rice and making rice cakes. One of the main photos snapped of her world record celebration shows her digging into a giant tower of strawberries, served with whipped cream. But she enjoys other treats too. During the presentation ceremony, Kane was given a box of chocolates, which she immediately opened and started eating, Guinness reported. Later, she was asked how many chocolates she wants to eat today, and replied 100. And according to the Daily Mail, she had previously attributed her longevity to a strong appetite and her liking of sweets, coffee, and fizzy drinks. So maybe you don't need to put down that coffee cup or box of chocolates, at least if you'd like to make it to the century mark. Some also credit the general Japanese diet with their increased longevity. When the Japanese eat meat, they eat mostly heart-healthy fish, rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Other popular foods include tofu, seaweed, and octopus, all of which carry a low risk for some cancers and arteriosclerosis. The Japanese diet's focus on fish, rice, vegetables, and other low-fat, non-processed foods has resulted in lower obesity rates compared to Western countries and a higher life expectancy, particularly among women. If you're keen to live past 100, consider the Okinawa diet, the region of Japan with the largest concentration of centenarians anywhere in the world. This consists of seaweed, bitter melon, leafy green vegetables, tofu, fish, modest portions of brown rice, and lashings of sweet potato. Although changing dietary habits means obesity has been rising, it's still relatively rare in a nation whose culinary tradition focuses on fish, rice, vegetables, and other foods low in fat. Age is also traditionally respected in Japan, meaning people stay active into their 80s and beyond. And while Kane holds the title of the oldest living human being, she is far from the oldest person in history. That title belongs to Jeanne Calment, who lived to be more than 122 years old. Though her age has been verified, there is a popular conspiracy theory that she actually died many years earlier. The conspiracy states that Calment's daughter was posing as her mother in order to save money. Some claim that Calment in fact died at the age of 59 in 1934, and her daughter Yvonne assumed her identity after the fact to avoid inheritance taxes, and was thus the one who died in 1997 at the impressive but not record-breaking age of 99. But now Calment's fans are breathing a sigh of relief after the publication of a new study which disqualifies the previous study. Presenting mathematical models they say make Calment's age plausible, the team adds that the previous previous study and its own mathematical findings do not reach the level expected for a scientific publication. The French team readily admits that most age claims beyond 115 are false, but the experts say that members of their team, unlike the other researchers, were actually able to visit Kalman in person. Coming in more than 3 years younger is the second oldest person to ever live, Sarah Naus. The Pennsylvania native lived to be 119 years old and passed away in 1999. Naus, who was born September 24, 1880, and lived a quiet life as a homemaker and insurance office manager, found herself in the international spotlight after Guinness declared her the world's oldest person in 1998, upon the death of Marie-Louise Febroni-Malheur of Quebec, who was 117. At the time of her death, Sarah was still following her passion on television, golf. She boasted that she had been able to live many years by nibbling milk chocolate turtles, cashews, and potato chips. In an interview in 1998, she said that in order to live as long as she did, you have to keep yourself busy, work hard, and never worry about how old you are. Naus died of natural causes, although she wasn't sick at that moment. She still remains the oldest person from the United States. Though she no longer holds the title, many hope to reach her ripe old age. With the exponential developments in medical technology, that dream might become a reality for many people.
So there is a Jewish blessing of may you live to be 120. And it would seem that at least some of these people are quite blessed to be approaching and in a few cases actually going past 120. There are a lot of technologies that are making us live longer and certainly longer. That improved nutrition, reduction in dying young, all make a huge impact in our ability to go forward. Better medicines, all that stuff. As a result, we are living longer and longer, every generation. My great-grandparents basically passed away. For most of them that lived, passed right away in their late 70s. I had one that passed away at 98, or almost 98, something like that. I think I had maybe a few weeks shy. I can't remember exactly. My grandparents certainly all outlived, for the most part, outlived their parents. Well, except for my grandfather, who died before who just died just before, I think, his 98-year-old mother. It was but his mother lasted to, again, 98. But every generation, for the most part, that's what's happening. So my mother has right now outlived several of her grandparents, except for the 98-year-old. She's still going full-time. She's still working full-time. My grandmother was working full-time until she was in her early 80s. So we can all have pretty fulfilling lives way past the age of what the U.S. would say the age of retirement. As we are likely to all become fairly old, we do need to start having thoughts, having plans and such before we get to that age. Some of those thoughts we have to have are, what is each one of us, what do we need to be happy at that age? So some people might have this interest in continuing to be very, very active, going to the gym every day or something, which you can certainly do. I know some people that were very, very active in their 70s, still playing, whatever it was, racquetball a couple times a week or whatever it is that he did. Some people might say, "Oh, I want children, grandchildren." Fair enough. If that's what will make you happy, that's a good option. Some people just want financial security. Also, that's fine. All those things are, those are all very, very individualized to what you specifically would want or need. And once you figure out what you do need to be happy, you also have to figure out how you're going to get what you need. And those will require very, very different things. Everybody have different ideas as to what they might need and how to get that, because what everybody wants is different. If you want financial stability, you might want to think now about getting a degree that's going to allow you to be financially stable. If you want grandchildren, the funny thing about wanting grandchildren is you probably need the children first, so you might want to see how you're going to get either that partner or sperm bank if that's your thing, however you need to do it. And as far as remaining fit, well, quite frankly, the biggest way of is being able to be fit in your 70s or whatever, or going into your 80s, is probably getting fit now and remaining active, whether especially if that's physical, but also mentally active. I would hope that I'm going to be at least mentally sharp in my 80s, and I'm just going to keep keeping myself sharp as best as possible. Because once you lose things, it's entirely possible that you can't gain it back. So those are just a few thoughts about those areas. Another question I have is, do we all age the same, or do we all age differently? Give you a moment to ponder that. Realistically, for the most part, while we all age, most of us age differently, and that could be due to a variety of factors. Partially could be relatives, partially could be healthcare, culture, economic status, also other decisions as to how we spend our lives. But this leads us to a few different types of aging. There are 3 patterns of aging. We have normal aging, which is what I think most people would think about, because we're all going to age, just most of us kind of age, relatively similarly, but, maybe not exact, but have a relatively normal age of when we start to decline or not, how we start to look. But there are people that age, that seem to age much faster than others, and there are some that age much slower than others. Now, everybody is chronologically aging the same way. Every day we get 1 day older. But people who are pathologically aging, they might at 50 show signs that would be more typical of an 80 or 90-year-old as far as their health and how they act and everything else. While a 90-year-old that's successfully aged, maybe they're more acting like a 50 or 60-year-old. That happens. No, as I mentioned, most of us are going to age relatively normal. There's going to be a lot of differences in how we all age, but it's going to be within normal parameters. And then there are, like I said, these people who have different aging patterns. I had the honor of having a family friend who I can use as an example, that this couple, they had a few years age difference, but one of them had pathological aging and one of them had very successful aging. These were friends that my grandmother knew 50, 60 years before both of them passed away. One of them only recently passed away. But it was a husband and wife. The husband, incredibly successful ager. The man did not look his age. He acted like somebody 20 years younger. He didn't, before, in the weeks leading up to his death, he really wasn't all that sick. He still was doing like racquetball or tennis or whatever the heck he was doing. He was very, very successful, very, very active at his age. And it was a big surprise when we hear that he had passed away. His wife, who was a number of years younger, I can't remember. There was a fair age difference between them, if I'm remembering correctly. The wife, who was younger than him, acted older than him. Her health issues were older than him, than what he would typically be. And because we could easily compare her to other friends that were similar ages, but she had a very much pathological aging. She didn't have a great health, and she had a much faster. She had a decline of health, which went fairly quickly, and it started when she was much younger, and she started aging. She was old before I was born, and as far as how she acted, how her body was, and all that stuff. While she realistically, her chronological age was not necessarily super old. So these two people, whom I want to say maybe had 10 years age difference, if you looked at their aging patterns, it probably was closer to 40 years difference between them. But I can safely tell you guys that you will probably know those, some people who chronologically are fairly up there, but are still active, and we all want to strive for that. Meanwhile, we know some young people who are not doing so well. So those are at least a few types of aging patterns, and I've got some more information for you, but not about that type of patterns. So as you can see by that previous slide on aging patterns, and in proper answer to the other question, yeah, we don't really age super similarly. We do have differences in aging, and that's what we can say. And there are a lot of theories that we look into stuff as far as this aging is concerned. And when we study these perspectives on aging, we're looking at all sorts of things like the social expectations that people place on older human beings. So when we look at stuff like social expectations, people in the US expect older people to eventually retire, to be slow, and to have all of this other, stuff. We're expected that when you're 60-something, you're not going to be working anymore. They think that the people are too old. Or maybe if you are working, maybe you're stuck working at Walmart. Anybody who's ever watched Jeff Dunham has heard about this little, one of his little ventriloquist dummies always makes a comment about working at Walmart. He was fired from being a greeter because he told people to get their shit and get out or something like that. But people usually think about that and how when you're getting older, you can't do very much. You might be grumpy. All those other things are things that we're putting on that old person. And that can affect our aging. If you notice in Japan, they're pretty much still working. Assuming they want to work, they're still not, they're still saying that, that they can in fact work. They might be a little bit slower, but so what? So, as far as this life course theories, we're talking about the normative timing and social roles. You're expected to do things at certain times. Right now, you're expected to be at the time of your life where you're expected to go to college. And eventually, in a couple of years, you're going to go off, do whatever it is you do. You're going to go and have fun having a career, having kids, grandkids, whatever. And then at a certain age, you're expected to retire and just be grandma, grandpa, whatever you do. But that timing and those social roles really do impact how we think about ourselves and all of those real situations. As far as, maybe somebody who is young, feeling fairly young, might take that retirement. They might, first of all, they might still work. They might get a different job. And they might go RVing and become very, very adventurous. While most people don't expect a 90-something-year-old to go skydiving, there was a neighbor I had up in Blairsville, Georgia, celebrating his 90 something, somewhere in his 90s, and he decided to go skydiving. Didn't expect that. You would expect that for somebody younger, but the guy was still, relatively young at heart. His health was pretty good, so it wasn't a huge issue. As far as these lifespan theories about outside of that, they also really discuss individual differences. Everybody is a little bit different when it comes to how we age. We already know that. And all of this information ends up being very important to really think about. There are a lot of other things that can go about, including your cohorts, which would be different, any type of socio-cultural subgroups, historical events that might affect everything. All those things really can change and affect how you are aging. So cognitive aging. Some of this is going to be a throwback to one of the other lectures that I already have up, so you might have to just bear with me. And for more information about any of these, you might want to seek out one of the other lectures. So decreases, one of the things that does decrease is that fluid intelligence, which tends to be the problem-solving intelligence, applying things to a new situation. I have a Dig Pig t-shirt that says professional problem solver, and quite frankly, I know that at some point my problem-solving ability is not going to be nearly as good. That, at least as far as new information goes. So this will tend to decrease when one is getting up there in years. Recall of information. It might be a little slower. A lot of us are very familiar with computers, so I'm just going to use the computer example as because everybody's somewhat familiar with it. The recall of information is if you look at a hard drive that you use a lot, so it is full of stuff. Some stuff might be good stuff, some stuff might be bad stuff. The situation is that the more you use your hard drive, first, the more full it's going to be. The more you're going to fill it up. The more you're going to be in a situation where it might be slower to pull that file or open that file or whatever. You might also have other programs running in the background, but that's a whole nother story. But this situation, same thing with aging. You might have just simply a lot more stuff going on. You might simply have more situations where you are going and trying to find this information. Maybe you can't even access it, who knows. But there's certainly less files to go through if you're younger. Just too much crap when you're older. Of course, you also have other issues like if you have dementia, Alzheimer's, sometimes there's other stuff that's blocking that. So in that case, it's like there's a plaque that's built up and is causing other issues. Your working memory, that is the manipulation of your stuff in your short-term memory thing. Working memory is not quite short-term memory, but they are related. They're very similar. But working memory has that manipulation that you are going through. So you might beat an old person in chess, since that relies on their working memory. When some of the other things that they were showing in one of those other videos about the older people, the one lady said she still can do, play Othello or something like that, and still does math. She's got to have some decent working memory to continue going on that. But in general, it is going to decrease, so she might not be as fast as she was before. As far as processing speed, well, processing speed, as I mentioned in one of the other lectures, it's going to continue going up, or going up until you hit somewhere around 25, 30, to a point. That's where the myelination continues going. Really, the fastest you're going to get is in your teens somewhere. but myelination does continue, and so it might continue to go up until your 30s, and then it really goes downhill. But so that probably shouldn't cause much surprise. It's all processing speed there. So inhibitory functioning, all of us know that one old person that just says whatever the hell they think. And that's fine. But the inhibitory functioning can mean several things. That's just one example. And you know what? If they say whatever they think, who's going to stop them? They're old. You also may have issues with different things like vision and hearing. For vision, for example, you may end up having to have bifocals or have to have reading glasses. My father, when he was nearsighted his entire life, when he got older, he ended up in bifocals and eventually didn't need anything. It's very confusing to me as to what happened, but apparently it has something to do with your ability to maneuver the different muscles in your eye or something. So it's not, some things are just not as flexible as they used to be. So we've got so vision. So some of y'all might. I had LASIK some years ago. Now, technically speaking, I'm supposed to have reading glasses. I only needed them to take the GRE because it was in font 8 and I'm getting old. Hearing, this should come as no surprise for a lot of people that, well, quite frankly, you may need a hearing aid as you get older. That's just one of those things. The things that increase is that whole concept of crystallized intelligence. That's that real big knowledge base that you already have. Your cognitive efficiency will also increase. I'm sure a whole bunch of people are familiar with some people that just, there are lots of options restaurant-wise. Well, maybe not where I'm recording this lecture, but there are a lot of options out there. And if there are a lot of options out there, there's always going to be one wise guy who goes off to the same restaurant, maybe eats the same thing every single time. They don't want to deviate. You can make the argument that they're actually being very, very cognitively efficient. And that can be that they know what's good. Why bother to do anything else? Why bother take the chance that it's not going to be nearly as good? That's basically what that is. What remains the same, usually, is recognition of other things. We sometimes see problems with this in people with Alzheimer's. But it's amazing to what people with that disorder, what they do and do not remember or recognize. So let's see. So some of the things that we've actually found that's kind of interesting are people that, if you put in a correct memory cue, well, we are able to they're able to recall things better. For example, take somebody who has really bad Alzheimer's. If you know some music that maybe that they're familiar with, they might barely be able to remember anything. But if you play like certain musical situations, certain songs, they might be able to pause and just start singing along with it. It's actually really interesting. They're recognizing the music and obviously recalling that information. It's kind of amazing when you think about it. Are we the same person all of our lives? Some people may say yes, some people may say no. One of the things we do know is that there are parts of our personality that tend to change over the course of our lifetime. That includes, for those familiar with the Big Five personality traits, neuroticism and openness to experience both tend to decrease as we get older. That being said, conscientiousness not only increases, but also tends to predict important life outcomes, including longevity. For those of us who are lucky enough to get to an older age, we may find that there are a lot more changes in what we find meaning in. Somebody young might find meaning in pursuing, money, while an older person may not really find that much meaning in that. Maybe might find more meaning in different relationships, for example. There also might be some people that are aware of this concept of being young at heart. And I don't really know why that really goes into changes, but certainly there are some. I don't know, this slide seemed a little bit strange when I created that, so I do apologize for that. But young at heart, there are some people that just look and look and act much younger than they should be as far as their chronological age. Being young at heart, or having that feeling of being young at heart, is linked to, is basically positive. They have positive self-perception. They tend to accept changes as they come about. And these are the type of people that go off and, can act 10, 20 years younger. And they have a really good personality, and they also tend to again, not age, and to continue being as young for a much longer time period. An example of somebody who might be young at heart is, and I'm telling this on my grandmother. My grandmother was always the type of person who acted 10, 20 years younger than she was. She was the type of person that she didn't need to get drunk to get onto a desktop and with a lampshade on her head. She was just always the life of the party. When she was in her 70s, I believe, she went to a male strip club with her sorority, and she doesn't embarrass. The guy was trying to embarrass the old lady and danced in front of her, and she promptly said, "I've seen bigger and better." And everybody got a good laugh, and he sulked away. And she was able to do this because, as far as mentally and how she feels, she was, young enough. She acted just like any other, young person, but with a little bit of an attitude. She wasn't going to let this guy embarrass her. A lot of older people who might be still really act old, they might have just shifted away, been a little bit of embarrassed that this good-looking young man was doing that in front of them. But I use this as an example of, she's young. She was very much young at heart. Who in the 70s going to a strip club. Come on. And she was the least embarrassed of anybody there, even though they had people that were both older than her and younger than her. I don't think the rest of her sorority would have acted quite that well, although I do wonder why they were all there. But that's an example of somebody who's very young at heart, and she's only really started to deteriorate at the age of 87 years old. So, as we get older, relationships remain important. And we have a few theories as to really why they're important, and in some cases why they become more important. But there are two theories that say that there are different priorities as to why these relationships happen. One of them is this convoy model of social relations, which basically says people have reciprocity. That is, basically that could be physical reciprocity or emotional. I guess in this case, probably more emotional. The socio-emotional selectivity theory, in that case, that really focuses on the changes in motivation over the time frame. Like, younger people might be more interested in information gathering than older people who may just need to basically go back to sharing. Those are examples. Relationships when you get older tend to be more positive and less negative, but they also tend to be smaller. Probably because the older people are might realize that they don't have a lot of time to spend on negative people. So they do tend to be smaller, but really, when it comes down to it, probably a better quality of friend. So are older adults happy? And how do we determine well-being? Emotion and well-being. Emotional challenges of aging. You can make the argument that there are actually several, and we'll just go through this a little bit one by one. Psychological well-being. There's a lot of concerns about this. Now, please note this isn't necessarily depression and anxiety. It's more like, stuff like more positive development of yourself, for example. There's global subjective well-being, really how you perceive your life, your age, health, etc. Social, maybe social support, and all of the other things related to that. There's also hedonic well-being, which is your emotional and positive affect, but it will tend to decrease as you get older, probably due to a variety of factors. So what are some of the factors that may contribute to longevity? Well, there should be quite a number. Influences include genetics. People whose family live longer are more likely to live longer themselves as well. So that's very common. Environmental, of course, could be the actual environment. Maybe someone who lives near Chernobyl might not live as long, possibly because of more radiation. This may also include access to good health care or similar things. Successful aging. We kind of had a little bit of discussion about successful aging. Successful aging is that situation where maybe you're 80 years old and you're acting like you're 60. You have you're continuing to be successful in as you get older. Ways to successfully age have fewer risk factors. Obviously, we've lower risk factors of cancer. Obviously, don't smoke. Don't be careful with your drinking. Apparently, based on what I can tell by the other video we listened to, apparently it's not a big deal about chocolate. So eat it up. Keep yourself in regular maintenance. That could be exercise. That could be these people are just doing some tai chi, I think. But these are all things that could be very useful when you are trying to maintain yourself. I'm not necessarily trying to improve yourself at this point. Well, maybe you are, but certainly at least trying to maintain your base levels so that it doesn't deteriorate terribly. And also this whole concept of active engagement. Now, active engagement can be a variety of factors, but a lot of things come down to stuff like keeping your mind engaged too. Keeping your body engaged. They did a study called the Nun Study a few decades ago. It has since grown to like 700 people, but they started off with this collection of nuns, and they wanted to see if they could maybe see what why they're successfully aging. They actually had a lower risk of Alzheimer's and still a good level of health until they finally passed away. And Uh, they also studied what these nuns were doing. A lot of them were very, very actively engaged, especially with their mind. They, of course, didn't have that many risk factors. They were nuns, but they went off, were doing crossword puzzles. They may speak a couple of languages. They were, they read like crazy, and most of them did not get Alzheimer's, at least not at the rate that a more regular population would get. And they actually donated their brains to science. Now we're up to like 700 people that they're using this to study successful aging and cognitive decline, or in this case, lack of cognitive decline. It's a very interesting study. Recommend everyone go read about it. As we come to the end of this lecture and come to the end of the life process, life cycle, I have some advice from a psychiatrist on how to prevent dying. This is, from what I understand, really did happen. I heard it from one of his students. Well, actually, I've heard it from several of his students. So, a student arrived at one of the 5-day intensive seminars Milton Erickson held in his home office near the end of his life. When Erickson asked why she had come, she replied frankly, "My teacher told me I should come to see you before you died." Erickson smiled and said, "You tell him that dying is the last thing I intend to do." The group laughed at the pun. Then Erickson said with a twinkle in his eye, "Do you want to know how to avoid dying? Always wake up every morning." "And do you want to know how to ensure you will wake up every morning?" he continued. "Drink lots of liquids before you go to sleep." Sorry, I couldn't resist. There are many people here that are going to be likely going into healthcare, but even for those who aren't going into healthcare, all of us, unfortunately, are going to have to deal with dying at some point, whether it's us ourselves or a friend, family. And there are lots of ways to go about facing this. And Scrubs has a very good little scene about two different perspectives on how to face death.
Your kidneys aren't responding to the medication anymore. I'm afraid we're going to have to start you on dialysis.
I'm not a big fan of dialysis.
Yeah, well, unfortunately we don't really have a choice.
Well, actually, I do have a choice.
Certain things you never expect to come out of a person's mouth.
I think I'm ready to die.
I bet a ton of bricks for Dr. Dorian. Can I get that pen back?
You're going to have to shut your mouth at some point. Sweetie, I'm 74 years old. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, but with dialysis you could live another 80 or 90 years.
I think you're being a little irrational.
No, I'm not.
Everybody dies sometime.
She doesn't want dialysis?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, if she declines dialysis, then there is no ethical dilemma.
But what about our duty as doctors to do everything in our power to help her?
What about our duty as doctors? Look, this has nothing to do with the patient. It's all about you. You are afraid of death, and you can't be. You're in medicine. You got to accept the fact that everything we do here, everything, is a stall. We're just trying to keep the game going. That's it. But ultimately, it always ends up the same way.
I win.
Where? I don't see.
Here, diagonal.
Pretty sneaky, Death.
Hope I help.
She's telling her family. There's nothing that could make me go in there right now. You didn't tell them, did you?
It didn't come up. Look, they don't need that burden. Besides, it just gives me a bunch of reasons to change my mind.
Speaking of which, I took the liberty of jotting down a few things I think everybody should do at least once in their life. Okay, number 1, eat a sausage and pepper hoagie from Enrico's.
Well, of course I've done that.
Number 2, go to Asia.
Gonan-kan garai Kyoto ni sunde imashita.
I want to take that as a yes, and I'll also check off learn a foreign language.
Done.
Fine. Go to the top of the Eiffel Tower.
Oh, now you're making stuff up.
No, I'm not. It's right here. You can look at it.
Listen, Dr. Dorian, there is not one thing I regret as I lay here right now. I'm ready. I really am.
You have had an amazing life.
Good. Then we agree. Now, aren't there other patients you need to be seeing?
Me? No. I've been off for 2 hours.
So with your precious free time, you've been sitting in a hospital room talking to an old lady. What about your list? How many of those things have you done? For that matter, how many times have you sat on the grass and done nothing? You need to start taking some time for yourself, young man. Promise me you'll do that.
I will.
Good. Now, get out of here. Go on.
Yo, I just want to check out a few things before I get going here.
Are you okay?
I'm scared.
Come here. Come here. Come here. You're okay. You'll be just fine.
So that shows two very, very different perspectives. Miss Tanner had her life. She's very content about what she's done, and she's okay with going. And there are people who aren't nearly as okay with going. JD's upset, and it's not even his time. But there are older people that also certainly have not had nearly as a fulfilling life and have not yet come to terms with their own passing. One of the things that JD starts doing, that bucket list, that's actually a really good idea. I would actually encourage everybody to do something like that. And as you can tell, she had her bucket list, and obviously it was very similar to what JD was suggesting. She has done it all at this point.
Your kidneys aren't responding to medication anymore.
But death is something without all of us
I'm
are
afraid
going
we're
to
going to
have
start you on
face at some point,
dialysis.
unfortunately.
I'm not a big
So here are some of your discussion questions. What are some of the ways the process of aging differs between individuals? You can, of course, look at the theories on aging, which do present different ways of examining these things. Are we the same person all of our life? How do we derive meaning from growing old? How does growing old affect our identity and our concepts of self-worth? What do relationships look like as people age? What are some of the factors more specific factors that didn't necessarily get mentioned that could contribute to longevity? Because I kind of went very, very broad. What are something more specific in this lecture? And you can, of course, have the ethical issue of did JD do the right thing? Because obviously he thinks it's an ethical issue. Dr. Cox is not nearly as doesn't believe that there is. Should he have continued? Should he have tried to do more? Is my understanding that the, of course, character does pass away, and apparently the actress is also gone too as well. So, but that did JD do the right thing? That that whole ethical issue does come up time and time again in Scrubs. So, of course, if you have any other questions, you can feel free to do whatever you need to do. Get a hold of me, email me, comment below, whatever makes you happy. So, see you all in the next lecture.